Why are we so dumb when it comes to energy reduction and efficiency? With all the talk about climate change, transitioning to renewable energy and electric vehicles, we're still missing some of the easiest no-brainer stuff. Hi, my name's Greg and welcome to the first Campfire Chat episode on the Electric Car Australia EV channel. As mentioned previously, Campfire videos will be a different format and more along the lines of me having a bit of a rant about subjects I think are important to all of us. And I really can't wait to hear your thoughts on the subject we're going to talk about today and also the general idea of the Campfire Chat concept. So over to my backyard campfire setup. Probably needs a bit more thought, so don't hold that against me yet. But this is our normal camping trip setup. Just don't have the fire going in it today. And as usual, a big shout out to my supporters, Di, Simon and Ken K, my regular Patreon, Ko-fi and YouTube supporters. And also, but Olamu, I hope I've pronounced that right, also recently sent us a couple of dollars in support. So thanks very much for that. You can join them by visiting the donation links in the show notes. So let's get into the subject of the stupidity and absolute wasting of energy we're going to talk about. Now this comes from my frustration at all the talk and the headlines around the big stuff about reducing fossil fuel use and moving to renewable energy, but it's the little things that actually need doing. They're smaller, easier to do, but they often get forgotten about. And it'll stop using so much energy in the first place and make sure that the energy we do use goes further by increasing efficiency. Now don't get me wrong, the big stuff's important, but the little stuff really adds up. Now the problem, of course, the little stuff isn't as sexy and it doesn't win pollies as many votes, but this stuff can make a real difference and it doesn't cost much. And once it's set up, it's set and forget and the savings just roll in. And there's so many different things that we can be doing right now in the efficiency and energy reduction space. But today I want to look at just a couple. The first one's vehicles, because this is an EV channel after all, and we're also going to look at retailers and some of the stuff that they can do, because I have some background in that area in a previous life. Now in the vehicle space, we should be moving to smaller and more efficient vehicles, sized to meet 80 to 90% of our everyday needs. And when we need something bigger, we just go and rent it, car sharing type things, so we can get some larger and heavier, less efficient vehicles for the 10 to 20% of the time when we need it. Now let's face it, driving the big V6 diesel dual cab to pick up the kids from school every day, but camping in it only 3 weeks each year is just crazy. And we see that stuff all the time. Now the same goes for EVs. I'm not just going to bag out fossil fuel vehicles. Dragging around a heavy 80 kilowatt hour battery every day when most Australian vehicles travel less than 35 kilometres a day is just batshit crazy. If you do a road trip 4 weeks of the year and you own an EV, why not have a smaller EV and you can again just rent a larger EV for those trips when you do those road trips once or twice a year. We're honest, most of us are getting around in vehicles much bigger than we really need for our everyday use. But hey, vehicles are a very personal, ego-driven thing. So let's look at another example, which I think's a no-brainer for change. And this one's in the retail game. So when I walk up the Queen Street Mall here in Brisbane every day, either in winter or summer, 35 degrees with 80% humidity, I'm amazed at how oblivious we are to the realities of living in a warming subtropical climate. I walk through the mall twice a day going to and from my day job, and most, if not all, the shop fronts are wide open entrances from air-conditioned stores directly into the open air Queen Street pedestrian mall. This is just insane. So here's some shots I took of some well-known brands with nice entrances, most with door greeters, security people, etc., but with wide open doors. Now this happens all year round, summer and winter, and I bet some of these guys have fancy, well-drafted environmental statements telling shareholders and customers how they're reducing their emissions and looking after the environment. But this is just crazy stuff. They're not backing up the actions with the words. Now, of course, this doesn't just happen in Brisbane. Pedestrian malls in Bourke Street in Melbourne, Pitt Street in Sydney, the Rundle Mall in Adelaide, etc. all have the same types of shops, and you'll find them in main streets and side streets all over Australia, doing this crazy thing with the doors wide open. Now, don't get me wrong, I come from a sales and marketing background, so I understand why the stores do this, but it really does need to be stopped now. Multiple marketing studies done over the years show any sort of physical barrier between the store and the customer will reduce sales. Be it a fly screen curtain, clear push open glass doors, or even an auto opening door, they all have negative effects on sales and stores. But the potential for businesses to make a few extra bucks should not come at the cost of the environment and the general community. So let me explain. Because of this stupidity, the heating, ventilation and cooling systems, or HVAC for short, have to be oversized to cope with the additional load. Heating or cooling the air escaping into the mall is hard work and expensive. This might seem like a trivial thing, but it really adds up. And keep in mind, some of these stores have multiple floors. And if we're talking cooling, we all know that cool air sinks downwards. To effectively cool the higher levels, a multi-floor system needs to work even harder to keep replacing the continuous movement of the cool air to the lower levels, which ultimately escapes out the front door. And of course, this craziness has multiple costs. Direct costs to the landlord for the install and maintenance of larger capacity HVAC gear, and the retailer for the huge amount of additional energy the system consumes. But it's also the indirect costs which are often missed, forgotten about, and they're usually larger and paid for by all of us, that really peeves me off. This increased demand to the grid, particularly on heatwave days, means poles, wires, transformers, generating plants, etc. all have to be bigger than they would otherwise need to be. And it doesn't matter if they're coal plants, solar plants, wind generators, batteries, whatever we're talking about, they all need to be bigger and more costly. And that's before we even think about the additional emissions generated, land used, or the additional materials used in the original manufacturing of the plant and equipment. Again, in one way or another, we all pay for this, and some communities' environments pay more than others. Of course, similar energy wastage is happening in other commercial and industrial buildings as well, and sometimes even domestic homes, with many more examples, not just cooled or warm air going out the front door. Okay, so let's change it up a gear and get positive. So what can be done about this to fix it? Well, the great news is it's not rocket science, it's relatively cheap, and it's all been done before. With the shopping mall example, probably the cheapest and easiest way is air curtains. These are basically a fan blowing a strip of air down across the door entrance. If you walk through one of these, you'll feel a blast of air on the top of your head as you go through. Now look, these are better than nothing, but they're probably more useful for stopping bugs and flies getting into stores, and not so much for stopping air exchange between the inside and the outside of the store. A more expensive but still relatively cheap and far more effective solution is an airlock. Basically a little separate room at the entrance of a shop. You see lots of these around the world, particularly in Europe. But they are being used in Australia by some smart operators. Now how they work is you walk through the first door of the shop and it closes behind you. And in effect you're in a little sealed room. As you continue to walk forward, a second door opens and then you walk into the main store. Now these are a very simple idea, but they work really well in separating most of the inside and the outside air. A European supermarket company who use this method in all their stores globally, including Australia, is Aldi. And if you look closely at the first picture there I've put up on the shot, from the outside you'll see, if you look really closely, the small airlock or internal walls of the room. The second picture there, from inside the store, it more clearly shows that airlock or that little second room. So a really smart idea, and these guys are good operators, so they wouldn't be doing this if they didn't get a decent payback. Savings on things like lower upfront plant and machinery costs and lower ongoing maintenance and energy costs must outweigh the additional dollars for the extra couple of glass walls and the additional auto door and the small loss of the floor selling space. Now, while we're talking Aldi, they also have some other great efficiency ideas, which I'm surprised more businesses don't use. Now, in their loading docks, where the trucks reverse in to unload all the stock, they have curtain type systems which seal around the back of the Pantech trailer, and that stops the air exchange between the heated or cooled store air escaping outside. Now, trucks can take a while to unload, and the gaps around the trailers can let heaps of inside air escape. So it's amazing that more Coles and Woolies supermarkets don't have this. And thanks to Trucker Jim's YouTube channel for the photos there, which were actually of a warehouse, but it shows very similar thing that's actually on the stores. I had trouble finding any photos from Australian Aldi stores, and I didn't have time to go and get one myself, but I have got one there from a store developer. So at the risk of overdoing the Aldi thing, one more fantastic idea they have is using small individual ice cream type freezers in their stores. So the picture here shows some of these modular units, which are a great idea in many ways. Firstly, they have a sliding closing lid, and they're horizontal. So when a customer opens the lid, most of the cold air stays sitting in the freezer. In Coles and Woolies, they mainly use vertical or upright freezers. And when you open the door, a rush of cold air lands on your feet, so they're way less efficient than the Aldi ones because most of the cold air comes out as customers are opening and closing the doors. Now, secondly, if an Aldi freezer dies, they can empty it, wheel it out the back, wheel in a spare, which by the way, they always keep one in each store. They plug it in, on it goes, and away they go. They put the stock back into it and they don't lose any stock to wastage, and they also don't lose any sales. So again, comparing to Coles and Woolies, if their upright freezer is out of action, it's a lot bigger section. They've got to remove a lot more stock. They've got to try and fit it into another freezer to keep it from going off. And if they can't do that, it all goes in the skip bin. And then you've got to wait for a fridge mechanic to come and fix it. Now, this just doesn't seem logical, cost effective, or great for the customer. So why are we doing it? Well, that's my 2 bobs worth on some easy wins to reduce energy consumption in the retail space. And if companies don't immediately start voluntarily doing this type of stuff, I hate to say it, but I think we need some government intervention and get those guys to step in and improve building codes and business practice codes to make sure this easy, low-hanging fruit stuff gets done. So what do you think? Are these easy wins? Should we be more focused on this stuff and the quick wins instead of the big shiny projects which take years to get off the ground? What about the campfire chat thing? Love it or hate it? Can't wait to read your comments in the comments section. Well, that's it for the first Electric Car Australia Campfire Chat. Again, a big thanks to my channel supporters, and remember, if your budget doesn't stretch enough to flick us a donation, that's cool. Just watching the videos, giving them the thumbs up and leaving a comment is super helpful. Well, next time we might fire up the cooker depending on the temperature and if the wife feels like making a Hungarian goulash. So we'll see that for next time. Stay safe, look after your friends and family, and we'll talk soon. Cheers.